It is somehow halfway through the year already, which is insane because 2024 still doesn't even sound like a real year to me. And here we are. Because it's halfway through the year, that means I have to do the mid-year book freakout tag. I don't have to do it. I'm choosing to do it, but I'm just going to pretend like there's a gun to my head or something. So let's just ignore everything I've been saying because I'm just rambling, and let's just get into the tag. I also just want to say ahead of time that I will be skipping some questions because some of them just aren't applicable to me. I'm sorry. I'm not going to talk about my biggest crush, fictional crush. I'm not 16 anymore. If you have fictional crushes, that's okay. It's just not something I have. It's not the kind of books I'm reading. My books are sad and like broody and stuff. It's not like romance books for the most part. Anyway, I'm rambling again. The first question is the best book you've read so far this year, and for me that is Monstrilio by Geraldo Samano Cordova. This book is brilliant. I love it so much. So essentially, you're following a woman whose son dies, and after she dies, in her grief, she cuts out a part of his lung and decides to keep it in a little jar, and then she starts to feed it, and then it starts to grow and it turns into a little monster, and she names him Monstrilio. And if that isn't enough to get your attention, I don't know what is, because to me that's like a perfect book. I love this book so much. I honestly just thought it was brilliant. Just everything it discussed, this is like the thing, I can't even discuss how much I love this book because I just start making no sense. So yes, this is the best book I've read so far this year. Number 2 is the best sequel you've read so far this year. And I've only read maybe 2 series this year, or like continued on with 2 series. So this was a pretty easy one. And that answer is The Dragon Republic by R.F. Kuang. This is the sequel to the Poppy War series, which is essentially a fantasy series inspired by China's Opium Wars, and you're following a main character, Rin. The thing is that I just can't summarize the Poppy Wars for you because I read it so long ago, but this is part of why I like this book so much, is that I don't remember anything that happened in the Poppy Wars, so I don't want to describe it. But I picked this book up not knowing anything that had happened in the first book, and I was like instantly completely captured by it. It was so good. It was so like fast paced. You just didn't want to put the book down. It was amazing. I really, really recommend this series, even though I cannot describe to you what it's about. Number 3 is a new release that you haven't read so far, but you want to. I have a couple for these. The first one I can think of is The Familiar by Leigh Bardugo. I don't know what that's about. I know that it has to do with, it's like in Italy, I think, and there's vampires or something. I also really want to read The Warm Hand of a Ghost by Catherine Arden. I don't know much about that one either. I know it takes place in World War I, I think, and it follows like a brother and a sister. I just want to read anything that Catherine Arden has written after the Bear and the Nightingale series, because I really loved that. And those are the ones I can think of off the top of my head. The next question is your most anticipated release for the second half of the year, and this one's so easy. This is Wind and Truth by Brandon Sanderson. This is book 5, The Stormlight Archive, and it's wrapping up like the first arc of the series. So I'm not sure exactly like whether the second arc is going to follow the same characters as the first arc, or whether it's going to be kind of like the Mistborn series, which is a completely different cast of characters. What I do know is that I'm dying to read it. The Stormlight Archives by Brandon Sanderson is definitely his best work. It's definitely like the greatest fantasy series of all time. It blows my mind. I really highly recommend it. It's also another one that I can't really describe because high fantasy is so hard to describe. I promise you I will describe the later books in this video for the most part. I promise you I'm not that much of a mess. Number 5 is Biggest Disappointment so far. And for this one, I'm so sad about this. It has to go to The Left Hand of Darkness by Ursula K. Le Guin. I read The Dispossessed by Ursula Le Guin like a year ago or so, and I was obsessed with it. I loved it so much. It made me want to read everything she's ever written. It was such a unique blend of like politics and social commentary and science fiction. And I was really excited to read this one in particular because in The Left Hand of Darkness, you are following this anthropologist that goes to this new planet called Winter. And in Winter, apart from being freezing cold all the time and being perpetually in a state of winter, the people there also are genderless. Their gender is fluid, at least. It's really complicated, but essentially like they don't typically have any genitals, and there's like mating seasons where they will then have genitals, but it's not like they always have female genitors or they always have male genitors. It switches. So it's really interesting in that respect. But I had hyped this book up so hard in my mind. Like I was convinced this was going to be the best book I've ever read, and it wasn't. So My heart kind of hurts just thinking about it. I still liked it. Like, I still think it's a good book. But I was just convinced that this book was going to completely blow me away. And I spent most of the book feeling kind of lost and not feeling like I was understanding what was happening, which I think ultimately may have been the point. Like, I think maybe you're supposed to be in the role of this anthropologist who is on this strange planet and kind of learning about the customs as he goes along. But ultimately, it wasn't a very fun reading experience for me to not really understand the world and its world building most of the book. So this was a really big disappointment, and it hurts my heart, and I'm so sad about it. Next is what was your biggest surprise? And for me, that was The Stepford Wives by Ura Levin. This is a very short book, so I don't want to describe it too much, but essentially you're following our main character Joanna, who moves to Stepford with her husband and her children, and then she slowly starts to realize that something is wrong with the wives of Stepford, hence the title The Stepford Wives. This book was a surprise to me because I watched the movie and I really loved the movie, like the original one, not the new version. And so I went into this book already knowing everything that happened. Like, nothing was gonna be a surprise to me. But I fucking loved it. I loved it so much. It's just such like a masterful portrayal. I can't say what it's portraying because I don't want to spoil anything. But it's just like, it's psychological suspense. It's just, oh, it's so good. I highly recommend everyone to read this. I loved it. And I loved it despite already knowing everything that was going to happen, which is kind of a feat because a lot of time watching a movie or a TV show adaptation of a book kind of ruins the book for me because then it's not as fun because you know everything that's going to happen. But not the case here. Next question is favorite new author. And this one I'm kind of cheating a little bit because this author isn't a debut author. And it's also not a new author to me, but it's an author that I grew a lot of appreciation for recently, and that is R.F. Kuang. Yes, I'm using the same book yet again. I just think, like, reading the end of the Poppy War series, reading R.F. Kuang's books in general is so refreshing. It's like a breath of cool air. Is that the saying? I don't think that's a saying. Let's ignore that, though. It's just so nice to read a book by someone whose politics I agree with. Like, it's so nice to read a book that, like, frankly discusses imperialism and colonialism and racism and talks about gender dynamics and just, oh my god. I can't even describe how much I love it. Like, it's especially in a fantasy world. Like, so oftentimes in fantasy, they're written by, like, old white men, which is, like, fine. But then a lot of times, like, the books portray their prejudices, even if they're not aware they have prejudices and biases. Like, even Game of Thrones, there's too much rape. There's, like, a lot of sexism in the way that he's writing. Like, not he's trying to portray it. Like, fantasy books have their issues. It's a genre that's just dominated by old white men for far too long. So the fact that this is, like, a young woman of color writing this, and that she's writing it with a critical eye to these things, oh god, I love it. I love it so much. I want to read everything R.F. Kuang writes. I want her to just stay locked in a room and writing fantasy 24/7. I know she's doing a lot. I know she's at like Yale studying like languages, and she's doing her PhD, and she's doing all this crazy amazing stuff, and I love that for her. But what I personally would love more is if she just wrote books 24/7 and published like 10 times a year. Thoughts? I think it's doable. The next two questions I'm skipping because it's favorite fictional couple / your favorite crush and then your favorite character. And I just like, when I used to read a lot of YA fantasy and stuff like that, I totally would have been able to answer these questions. It's just not really how I read or like consume books anymore, so I'm skipping those. I'm sorry. And the next one I'm also kind of amending a little bit, and that is a book that made you cry. But I haven't cried at any books this year, so I kind of just chose like the most emotional book that I read. And the answer to that is Notes on Heartbreak by Annie Lord. This is a memoir that just details the author's experience during a breakup and how like soul crushing it was, and then it ultimately goes through her healing and getting better. And I didn't cry. I wasn't like, oh my god, I'm so emotional. But I wasn't like that for any of the books that I read this year. This book, though, like, anyone who's been through a breakup knows how absolutely shitty it is and how much it, like, destroys you, especially if it was someone you really cared about. So I could really relate to the book in that sense. Yeah, that's all. The next one I'm also tweaking a little bit. And it is book that made you happy. And I read a lot of sad, dark, depressing books, so I don't really feel happy when I'm reading most of the time. And this book, like, it almost feels insensitive to say it made me happy, but let me explain myself. And that is The Fire Next Time by James Baldwin. This book deals with very unhappy things like racism, number one. It's not a thing you should feel happy when reading about. But I kind of felt happy when reading this book just because I loved it so much. I love James Baldwin's writing so fucking much, and it really got to me. And after I read this book, I was just so happy that I had read it, and it just affected me so thoroughly. So that's how I'm tweaking this one, and I'm gonna let it slide. I hope you let it slide as well. This next one was a hard one for me. It's the most beautiful book you've bought so far this year. And honestly, like, I like a lot of covers of books, but I couldn't remember which ones I had bought this year. So the one I chose for this prompt is Cleopatra and Frankenstein by Coco Mellers. This is a book I know nothing about. I bought it because of the cover. So it's actually kind of a perfect answer for this prompt. I just think it's beautiful. I love any book cover that has like an oil painting on it. Sign me the fuck up. I'm obsessed. I wish every book had an oil painting on the cover. Let's hire a real artist. Let's get this shit done. Not that graphic designers aren't real artists, because I really do appreciate a lot of graphic design as well. But I just have a sweet spot for oil paintings on the cover of a book. And the very last question is, what books do you need to read by the end of this year? And honestly, my answer is like all of them. Like, if you look behind me, I would like to have all these read personally, if I could. However, that's not really realistic, so I chose a couple. Oh, I chose quite a few, actually, now that I'm looking. Okay. First off is Children of Dune by Frank Herbert. This is the third book in the Dune series, which I hate describing, but I'll give a tiny bit of a shot. So essentially, the Dune series is following the family Atreides, taking place like well into the future in a sci-fi society. And basically, House Atreides has been given the planet Arrakis to rule. The planet Arrakis is known for its spice, which is something that's harvested on the planet, and it's unique only to the Arrakis. And spice is used for intergalactic travel, and it's also used for the kind of magic system in these books. But shortly after House Atreides takes control of Arrakis, it is betrayed, and the Harkonnen, who used to control Arrakis and are the stereotypical bad guys in the Dune series, come and kill everyone, except for Paul Atreides and his mother, who escape and go to live with the Fremen, who are the indigenous people in Arrakis. And that's pretty much the gist. I need to read this because I really want to continue on reading Dune. I really want to finish this series. I'm really intrigued. I want to see where it goes. I hear it gets really weird, and that makes me want to read it even more. Next is a book that I'm choosing not to know much about, so I'm sorry that I keep being very vague in my descriptions of books, but it's okay. It happens sometimes. And that is Rouge by Mona Awad. What I know about this book is it deals with like beauty issues, like beauty standards and stuff like that. I really want to read this book because I loved Bunny by Mona Awad so much. It makes me want to read everything she's ever written. I've also got Adult Drama and Other Essays by Natalie Beach. If you don't know about Caroline Calloway, then you are much less online than I am. But essentially, Caroline Calloway is this influencer who's gotten famous a lot for her scams, which arguably, whether they're scams or not. But her best friend Natalie, hence Natalie Beach, published this essay about Caroline in The Cut, and it was very cutthroat. It was a incredibly well-written essay, and that's actually how I found out about Caroline Calloway, and I started following her after that because I'm just kind of amazed by her. And I read her book last year called Scammer, and this is Natalie's book that she got a deal for after she wrote that essay, and that essay is actually included in here, I believe. But I loved that essay so much, I want to see what else Natalie writes, and so I want to give this a shot. Then we have The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexandre Dumas. I try to say things in French, but I know I'm wrong, so don't make fun of me. This is a very beloved classic. I don't think you can really see. You might be able to see. I'm like a third of the way through, and I haven't read it in months. And I would just really like to finish this year. Like, I don't want this, like, overhanging me. Like, I want to read it. I might actually do a video, like, reading books I haven't finished. If that would be interesting to you, let me know. I might do that. And the very last book is one of my most highly anticipated books, and that is Minor Detail by, I'm covering her name with my hand, by Adania Shibli. I don't know why I had to completely move the book to read that. This book is by a Palestinian author, and it follows a Palestinian woman it follows two different timelines. One is like during the Nakba, I believe, where a Palestinian woman is raped by the IDF, and then they kill her. And then it follows years later another woman who reads about this woman's situation and is deeply affected by it because it happened on the day of her birth or something like that. And I've just heard that the story is harrowing and beautifully written, and I just really want to give it a shot. This is another one that was on like everyone's best books of 2023, or like best books they read in 2023 videos. So I really, really, really want to pick this up, and it's so short I have no excuse not to pick it up. So there you go. That is the mid-year book Freakout tag. I think I said that right. I am definitely freaking out. Thank you for watching. Leave me your answers down below. Leave me book recommendations down below. Leave me a comment down below because I love reading and responding to your comments. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you later with another video. Goodbye.